So let's start with a word that we all learned recently, which is mores, which is basically the main customs and conventions that we have in a society. And your talk is about changing laws and mores, right? And I guess it's a bit of a circular relationship in the sense that society develops and learns and adopts a certain value system based on which the laws get implemented, get made and then implemented. And it's cyclical, right? So would you like to speak to that a little bit and tell us about how it is that laws function in a society?
And thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really excited about it.
You might have to be a little louder.
Is this not clear?
Yes, much better.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I was saying, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm quite excited to be part of this, of this intervention. It's very, very unique, and I'm really excited to see how how you guys progress. So coming to your question, sort of directly, so how this really works is that the whole lawmaking process is basically codification of customs and practices that have been going on for a really, really long time, and by a long time I mean almost centuries. So that's one sort of job of the lawmaking process, to ensure that what was otherwise only passed on as as verbal information or probably in writing in some form, to codify that, to set out those rules, to set out those norms in a manner where you can always go back to it and see what it's saying, and the courts will interpret those customs which are now in the form of the law, so that the spirit of the law, the whole reason, the statement and objects behind that particular law are always in sync with how it's being interpreted or how it's being used. That's one main job of the lawmaking process. But the second, and I would say far more important job of the lawmaking process, is to ensure that if there are any traditional practices, any customs that were being followed for a really long time, but are not up to the standard of human rights, are not keeping an individual's rights or a person's rights at the center of it, that needs to be altered. And I think the best example of that is the law which made the commission of the sati practice an offense. So the sati practice, where the woman, her husband, especially in some northern parts of India, where after the husband would die, the woman would automatically go and sit on his funeral pyre, and she would voluntarily burn herself alive, and it was understood that is it, that once your husband has passed away, you have no other role to play, and therefore this is your destiny now. And so while that was a custom that was where it was prevalent, it was accepted, it was understood to be how things work, but the law did a social norm, but the law did the job of altering that, of saying that this cannot be, simply because it's been followed for so many decades and probably centuries. That doesn't justify it, that doesn't make it okay. But if we can also take just one step back and really figure out, where does this standard come from? And that's something now I keep saying far more regularly, that it comes from the constitution of the country. So the constitution of the country is like a holy book of, like in any other religion where there are holy books and how those books are really considered. The constitution of the country is that, as far as the legal standards are concerned. And especially
just jump in and ask you a question here, because just so that it makes we can join a few of the dots. Now, the constitution of a country, of our country, is what is like the mothership from where all the values and the rights that are upheld sit, right, for that country. But what is that constitution based on? Because people also talk about something called a rights-based or a human rights-based approach. Now, is there an overlap between these two? Because a human rights approach, I would imagine, is something that is broader or wider than just the constitution of a country. The reason I ask is because I'm sure there's countries in the world that actually don't conform to a rights approach, and just because it's in their constitution, I don't know. I mean, is that still correct?
No, you're absolutely right. And see, so internationally, even when when there was really no India as such, there was a lot of development that was taking place, and I think we can really trace it back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That was somewhere in the 1800s in the then America. And that really is the sort of the core document of any of the international human rights discourse.
Yeah.
So everything has then come from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR as it's known. Then we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, on Economic and Social Rights, social and cultural rights. Then we got specific, international covenants and norms on, say, the Convention on Discrimination and Elimination of Discrimination against Women, then on children. So a lot of development of what really means, what does the rights-based approach or what is the standard of human rights really means, that has been internationally developed. And you're absolutely right, not all countries adhere to it. And even where there are norms, you have to follow it, but there are really no sanctions as such. So nothing happens if a country, for example, like India, doesn't really stay sort of up to the mark of the commitments that it's made under the ICCPR or
but how does one check? So for instance, I'm sure, like, all these conventions that countries are coming up and signing them, right? And then I'm assuming that India signed a lot of the conventions, right? But then, as you're saying, if there's no check, first of all, how do we know whether we are, I mean, there must be some sort of report that comes out every little while to tell you, what is the scene? I mean, how are we doing on our human rights record?
So we have the United Nations, which is sort of like the international bureaucracy of the world.
Yeah.
And it's the United Nations which actually keeps track of all the conventions, helps in developing the conventions on each specific issue, on each specific topic. There are treaty monitoring bodies, basically. So these treaties which states sign on, which countries sign on, there are bodies which specifically monitor whether you are actually, sort of adhering to what you have signed on. Are your domestic laws, are your domestic policies in line with what you have committed to do? But the latest sort of, and I sort of jump here. So while there are the treaty monitoring bodies, there's the UN, and there is all of that. There have been a lot of examples where countries have spoken up against, say, human rights violations in a particular country internationally, and there have also been economic sanctions sometimes, where it's really the standard of that country is questionable. But that has worked, has not worked. But the most recent sort of phenomena which has developed internationally is the Universal Periodic Review, which is called the UPR, which is where all countries get reviewed by all other countries.
Yes.
And there is space. Sorry.
That sounds nice and democratic, I say.
I've also had the opportunity to view it, in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and it's most. For me, I'm not a big believer of the international sanctions and all of that, because there's a lot of diplomacy that goes on there. So if there is a lot of economic development and dependency, a lot of countries will not speak up against your country, even though there might be, human rights abuses that are taking place.
Yeah, and eventually when you do have sanctions also, it's the poorest people that suffer. So sanctions may or may not be the best.
Absolutely. Yeah. And but the Universal Periodic Review, I thought, from my point of view, I feel it's the most effective because all countries are speaking up and saying something about you, positive, negative, whatever. I mean, do it really. It also is. It's just by looking at a particular country's UPR report, you know what's their relationship with other countries. You know, so what's their relationship with their neighbors? What's their relationship with the, you know, with the big powers? What's their relationship with other countries similarly placed, etc. And in that space, there's also space for the civil society to give a report.
Yes.
So on a lot of specific issues, on a lot of general issues for a country, the civil society organizations have gotten together and given their shadow reports in a sense.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
right.
No,
So
I was just
according to me,
that's a nice segue, because to say that, okay, so okay, let's just come back to India for a second. What are some of the issues that we're doing well on, or where you think the law is like out there and cutting edge and sort of, and what are the issues where you think we're not doing so well on, and despite the law perhaps, or because we need to change the law?
so I would say that before we sort of get into the specific issues, if we can just complete this loop of
Huh.
our constitution.
Yes.
So our constitution making process was a really detailed one. It went on for a couple of years. There were a lot of experts who were pitching in. We learned, and this is after independence, we learned from various other constitutions of other countries, which were
Yeah.
either which had been independent for a really long time, or which had also recently gained independence, and we contextualize that to what our realities were.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's, if one ever has the time, the constituent assembly, the assembly debates, where
Yeah.
the constitution was being debated, various aspects were being debated, make a fantastic read to also understand what was going on in the minds of the lawmakers just after independence, and how
Yeah.
some of the things that they thought were required at that point in time, but their intention was to keep those for some time limit.
Right.
But I mean, and once you look at it from the point of view of today, some of those things are still there. Some of those things haven't done enough. But it's very interesting to see how they were able to mold the existing traditional practices, existing ways of living, diversity of the country, and bring it together in one document called the
Right.
Constitution. And it's in the Constitution where we have a chapter on fundamental rights, which is the non-negotiable.
Yes.
Which is something that as a state or as anyone, you cannot do anything which is in violation of the fundamental rights chapter. And what is also very interesting, which I want to touch upon, is that the Constitution acknowledges, and I always use the word acknowledges and I don't use the word gives, because something that is given can be taken back. It acknowledges the fact that all persons have human rights. So it's
Yeah.
not dependent on the fact that you're a citizen.
Yeah.
While there are some fundamental rights which are specific to citizens, but otherwise there are the basic rights like the right to life, etc. The wording is used at every person. So even if you're someone who has not been able to prove your citizenship in the country, or you are a refugee,
yeah,
you are still a person, and you still and our constitution acknowledges that you have these rights, and we will not do anything.
Constitution is therefore up there in terms of, it's probably, it has all the rights in it and everything. Okay, so now just thank you for that. I mean, that was actually an interesting way to understand the Constitution as well. That some part of it was a living document, but some part of it is in stone, and the stone is related to human rights. Okay, so yeah, but coming back to India, I mean, and what general citizens or general people who live here, or people, the thing is, do people trust the courts and the judicial process? Because my sense is that if something, people say, "Arey lafra ho jayega," which I'll translate for those who don't know Hindi, which is that it's a big problem when something goes to the courts. So I mean, what would be your take on that? Is it a free process? Is it a good process, or is it a corrupt process in general? And what would be your advice?
I think it's all of the things that you just said, that it's free, but it's corrupt. It takes a lot of time. It's very cumbersome.
It's
And we were speaking to someone just recently who said that you go to court for justice, but do you ever get justice? Do you ever get
because
relief?
it's not delayed often, right?
And also just sometimes the process itself is, it kills you.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of women's rights work. I do a lot of women's rights work,
Yeah.
and I go to court every day. But even then, I will not, suggest that someone should go to court right at the first instance.
Mm.
Even though I know that, especially from the point of view of women's rights work, if you don't go to court, you really lose out on establishing your right. But
Right.
you establishing your right will take so long, that it will be of no meaning when it actually comes, if it actually comes.
Right. So there must be a bunch of like family laws, or perhaps pertaining to marriage or birth or death, etc., that you can probably give us a quick 101 on, because when we talk loftily and we say everyone has a right to life and liberty, of course, but then if your husband smacks you, it's quite all right. I mean, the social thing is, yeah, they do that, they get drunk, it's okay, we accept it. And then suddenly you find yourself in a huge problem, because you are say it's actually abuse, and you're either not recognizing it or you recognized it, but there's nothing you can do about it because you can't leave, you're not economically independent, etc. So the usual. So I'm just like, and there's many things, right? There's inheritance, there's sexual abuse, there's just plain divorce, which is happening more and more. So which are these that you think that everyone should know a little bit about? Or maybe you've been just been watching the process and saying, by the way, there's this and this, and don't forget this. I mean, is there anything that you would pass on from everything that you've witnessed?
See, I for one do think that everyone should be taught basic law. I think
Yeah.
you must, because ignorance of law is not an excuse. So therefore, it is really the responsibility of the state to ensure that everyone knows the laws. And
Yes.
within that, so let me just start with the personal laws. So
Yeah.
how it works in this country is that our personal laws, which are the laws which govern marriage, divorce, maintenance, custody, succession, inheritance. We have a bunch of laws which are based on religion. So there's the Hindu Marriage Act, there's the Parsi Marriage and Divorce Act, there's the Indian Divorce Act, which is applicable to Christians, and there are Muslim codified laws, and so on and so forth. So, but with that, we also have something called the Special Marriage Act, which is the civil law. So so basically it's giving you the choice of either following a religious law if you want to, which has basically codified whatever was taking place in your as a religious practice in your religion, or you have the choice of following a civil law, which is without any traditional nuances. So a civil marriage will be a court marriage. A divorce under the Special Marriage Act will be equal for all. It doesn't matter if you're a Hindu or you're a Muslim or you're a Christian or you're a Parsi. If the Special Marriage Act is what you have decided to follow. And just sort of picking from the violence part that you spoke about. So we have this law which came in 2005, which is called the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Yeah. And that is a law, that is an example of a law which has come after a lot of study, almost a decade study of what is it that women want who face violence.
Yeah.
So instead of we saying that you should leave the house, you should divorce, blah, 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 there was an entire study done with these cases, with women actually, who were facing violence, who were facing violence either in their maternal homes or in their matrimonial homes. And after understanding what is it that women really need when they ask for relief, what do they want? That's the culmination that happened in the Domestic Violence Act. It's called the DV law. And the law, so the Domestic Violence Act is something which gives you, temporary relief. because it was found that a lot of times what women want is that the violence should stop, and till then give me some space.
Right.
Till then give me an option, because a lot of times women would not speak up, like you said, because they would get thrown out. The moment you go to the police station and someone from the police station even calls your husband or your partner, you will automatically be thrown out of the house. You won't have access to your children if you have children. You won't have access to any money. Your certificates, your passport, etc. will be torn off. So basically, then you are left with all of that. You have no identity, you have no means, you have no manner of actually getting this life together again. So the Domestic Violence Act, of course, also expanded the definition of what domestic violence really means, because before that, it was really focused on a married situation. But the Domestic Violence Act also recognizes that there are other kinds of relationships, which includes, any relationship that a woman can have with a man, whether it has a legal name or not, including, a live-in partner, including your brother, your father.
Yeah, so that's pretty modern. So that means, and even with this recent abortion sort of law, I think courts are becoming more and more modern in their interpretation. So would you give us a few examples like this of where you think that the laws are changing to reflect the modernity that's coming about in our mores, as they say?
So definitely, I'm just picking up from the abortion aspect that you just spoke about. So in comparison with most parts of the world, we have had legal access to abortion in certain conditions for the past 51 years. This law came in 1971, and it has been amended a couple of times, etc. And the interpretation of the Supreme Court, and I also wanted to just connect that while we have laws in our country which are like the acts, the Bare Acts, etc., which are passed by the Parliament, and all of that, we also have judge-made law, which is the interpretation of that law. And obviously, so in the hierarchy of courts, a high court will have territorial jurisdiction over the territory for which it is the high court. So a state, for example. But the Supreme Court is the law of the land for the entire country. Right. So if the Supreme Court is saying something, if the Supreme Court is interpreting a particular provision, a particular law, or reading down something, which is what happened in the Section 377 reading down, which was otherwise making an offense any even consensual sexual activity between two persons of the same sex, which has now been read down to remove the consensual part. So if there is force, it's still an offense. But where you're consenting to something, then the law has no business to be there, in between. Right. Yeah. So that is something that the Supreme Court has done. And similarly here in the abortion judgment, it's the Supreme Court which said that the law has created a distinction between a married pregnant woman and an unmarried pregnant woman, and there's no basis for it. So whatever is applicable for any pregnant woman, anything that is accessible for a pregnant woman, irrespective of her marital status, should be available for all pregnant women. So while the law is still narrow, and we spoke about rights-based, the law on abortion is not a rights-based law. I cannot, as a pregnant person, ask for termination of pregnancy just because I don't want to continue the pregnancy. I have to fall within the categories that the law provides for me to be able to access and it's based on medical opinion. So in a law which is not rights-based, the interpretation of the Supreme Court has been rights-based. I see. While limiting itself to how much the law, the space that the law is providing. So that is something, which is very exciting, and considering the fact that the world over, the discourse on abortion is really becoming very, very narrow, especially after the US Supreme Court has overturned its judgment.
Yeah. It's a very murky area, murky in the sense that there's lots and lots of things to consider when you. I mean, it's first of all, at the very root, a toss-up between the rights of the mother and the rights of the unborn child. And then there's the medical opinion, and then there's everybody's religious beliefs that come in. And so it's really,
And
I mean,
the
that is true, I guess.
constitution of this country does not,
Yeah.
except for maybe inheritance in some particular religions, does not consider the unborn having rights. It's you have rights the moment you're a person. So till the time, yeah. So, and you're not a person till you're actually born. And so therefore there's really, as far as this country is concerned, and you may have your religious point, sure, but as far as this country is concerned, the law is clear that the person who's alive has human rights, and not something else which is dependent.
Could you tell us something more about this?
So, purely from the point of view of the level of criminality that the law brings in, because otherwise there are a lot of laws like traffic violations, this, that, and the other, but the implications there aren't as huge. I would think that this law that came in 2012, which is the protection of children from sexual offences, I think that is a law which a lot of young people especially break without realizing that they are breaking a law. And that is simply because the protection of children from sexual offences, which is known as POCSO, makes any sexual activity between a person who is below 18 and anyone else an offence, and does not give any credence to the consent of the person who's the minor. So even if it's even if actually it's a consensual activity, the law does not recognize the consent of a minor as far as sexual activity is concerned.
And a minor is someone who's 18.
Who's below 18, yes.
Right.
And where both the persons are minors, then whoever is younger would be considered the survivor of violence, and the other person who's elder but is still a minor would be considered the offender.
So this covers like people who are in their, say, late teens, who are messing around with children who are younger than them.
Also,
like a classmate or somebody like that, who probably don't realize that one is still a minor and one is not. And another is, I suppose, when there's no legal consent, even when there's two children who might be doing something like that. Right.
See, so the intention of the law was to recognize that child sexual abuse takes place, and that the manner in which child sexual abuse happens is not similar to how the sexual abuse of an adult happens. And the law is gender neutral, so it's not specific only to the girl minor, but it's saying that any minor, because it recognizes that even boys are sexually abused. But in that, it's also saying that there is no consent, and so it brings within its fold a lot of consensual activity that happens between two teenagers, for example, or for someone who's say 16, 17, who is in a relationship or having an affair, or just just trying out stuff with someone who's say 19. Immediately right there, that's an offense. So to my mind, I think that is a law, and because the implications of it, I mean, you're in jail, you get bail, you have to face a trial. The sentencing is anywhere between 7 years and above, so you might end up in jail for at least 7 years, if not more. So to my mind, with the kind of implications that this law has, the fact that a lot of people don't know about it is really, really worrisome.
And what about the burden of proof? Because isn't that half the game? I mean, and we keep reading about these cases internationally where somebody comes up after 20 years and says something. Now, because I'm a woman and I'm part of the whole, I support the women's rights, and I believe the woman at first off. I will think that of course that's the case, right? But what are the rights of people? I mean, can they say, well, prove it, or can they say like, I don't mean the rights. I mean, what are the defenses that people come up with normally, and which fly or don't fly? So can they come up after 20 years and say, oh, hello, you did this to me now, and now you pay for it? So
See, so if you do come, so since there is no sort of law of limitation, like you don't have a specific time limit by which you have to raise the issue. in a criminal court or whatever. So therefore, yes, people can come even after decades and say that this had happened. But the
And
delay
even before the law came into being.
Yeah, even before the law came into being, yes.
Yeah, that's important.
But the delay in FIR, in filing, the first information report, etc., that has some amount of implications, not so much on a sexual abuse case, because, and you'll really have to make out a case of why did you come so late. You will have, that's an obstacle that you will have to cross. But the general, and again, this has happened because a lot of development on this jurisprudence has taken place over the years. Yes. Now the law is very clear that if a woman is alleging that she has been raped by someone, and that there was sexual activity which was non-consensual, she only has to say that I had not consented to it. And then the burden shifts on the defense to show that either it didn't happen or it happened with her consent. And there's a reason why this has come to be, because there were a lot of and by lot I mean like numerous instances where a woman would be facing trial just because she's raised the issue of an offense. Her character would be on trial, her past sexual activity, any sexual activity. Did you say no loudly enough? But you don't have any, there are no marks on your body. That means, that you were consenting to it. So, all of that, it's after that finally the Supreme Court in a number of cases set out the standard that as far as a trial for sexual abuse is concerned, where it's an adult woman that we're talking about who's the survivor, the fact that she's coming on in court and saying that I did not consent to it and that this was done, the burden has shifted on the other side.
So that's well, going back to children though, what is it that one needs to be aware of, either as young parents of young children or as young children themselves? How fine is it? Can you lose your future, your career, your everything based on
everything? This? Let me tell you, the example of a case during the lockdown where I got a call from someone from somewhere saying that her daughter, who's about 16 or 17, she was pregnant, and this was because she had, she was with her boyfriend, and she was about 4 weeks down. So it's not even, and she needed to terminate the pregnancy, and 4 week down a pregnancy doesn't even require a surgery. It's something that the medicines, which are allowed in India can do. But A, it was a lockdown, and B, the fact that POCSO also makes it mandatory to report for anyone. So for example, if you come to know that something's happening in your neighborhood, and that something is that a child is sexually abused or is likely to be sexually abused, you have to report it to the police. So similarly, where a doctor is to provide a service of a termination of pregnancy for a minor girl, obviously there has been sexual intercourse, which in the eyes of law is an offense. So the doctor has to mandatorily report.
Oh, excellent.
So now coming back to this example, when she went to the first doctor said, listen, you have to, there has to be an FIR. So FIR was lodged. Initially she was like, should I say someone's name or not? But then she finally did give the name of her boyfriend, who was above 18. He was just above 18. He was arrested. He was in jail for almost 6 months. Can you imagine a 19-year-old or 18-and-a-half-year-old boy is in jail for this? And she was able to access an MTP only from the third doctor finally that she was able to speak to. And the fact that the police was constantly turning up at their house, so it's the lockdown. Anyway, people are not moving, and then the police is turning up at your place, and they're in uniform. So everyone knows that they.
Right. No, so it's a travesty on all sides. And
on all sides, absolutely. When I spoke with the girl, she was in a situation, and of course, I'm no mental health expert, but she was in a situation where she was feeling really guilty for the fact that her boyfriend was in jail. And I was like, listen, we'll deal with your abortion first, because I'm sorry, this is the law, you're paying this price and he's paying that price, but this is the law today. And I'm really sorry about that, but we really can't do anything about it. So, when you ask me, what is it that parents and young people should be doing? I think they should be doing two things. One is find out what the law is and be aware. And two, talk about the fact that is this law really fair or not?
Right.
What should be there so that consensual sexual activity between two young people is recognized, but with that we don't end up throwing out cases which are non-consensual, which are sexually abusing, and we ensure that all of that does get reported, and that
you're also not wasting your time on a case like this. Yeah, so this is a good point to sort of zoom out a little bit and go back to that Moret's question, because I mean, this is exactly the point. I mean, if I was a young guy today, I'd be like, my God, it would pop me. First of all, I can't access a girl because everything is so segregated. It's becoming, it's quite crazy. I mean, it shouldn't be in today's day and age, but it's still quite segregated, right? And then you can't. I mean, there's such high levels of youngsters with sexual frustration because they just absolutely are never. I mean, if not, I mean, there's two India. Whenever we go back again, there's two Indias, right? There's the India and then there's Bharat. And there's India where everything is a bit more permissive and liberal. And then there's the Bharat where everything is very, very segregated. It is still steeped very much in the old cultural tradition of India, where, you literally don't even, you practically just touch your wife the first day you married her, right? So a guy is going to go out of this thinking, yeah, come on, they're going to chuck me in jail for fooling around with someone, or like, what freedoms do I have as a man? I mean, you're taking everything away, right? So not that I'm fighting on the side of anyone at this point. I'm just saying that, as more and more people learn that it's okay, I mean, to be a little bit more liberal around these things, where does it hit us? Does it hit us like on a society level? What needs to change at a value level for these things to come on full circle, where,
example of a case during the lockdown where I got a call from someone from somewhere saying that her daughter, who's about 16 or 17, she was pregnant, and this was because she had, she was with her boyfriend, and she was about 4 weeks down. So it's not even, and she needed to terminate the pregnancy, and 4 week down a pregnancy doesn't even require a surgery. It's something that the medicines, which are allowed in India can do. But A, it was a lockdown, and B, the fact that POCSO also makes it mandatory to report for anyone. So, for example, if you come to know that something's happening in your neighborhood, and that something is that a child is sexually abused, or is likely to be sexually abused, you have to report it to the police. So similarly, where a doctor is to provide a service of a termination of pregnancy for a minor girl, obviously there has been sexual intercourse, which in the eyes of law is an offense. So the doctor has to mandatorily report.
Oh, excellent.
So now coming back to this example, when she went to the first doctor said, listen, you have to, there has to be an FIR. So FIR was lodged. Initially, she was like, should I say someone's name or not? But then she finally did give the name of her boyfriend, who was above 18. He was just above 18. He was arrested. He was in jail for almost 6 months. Can you imagine a 19-year-old or 18-and-a-half-year-old boy is in jail for this? And she was able to access an MTP only from the third doctor finally that she was able to speak to. And the fact that the police was constantly turning up at their house, so it's the lockdown. Anyway, people are not moving, and then the police is turning up at your place, and they're in uniform. So everyone knows that they.
Right. No, so it's a travesty on all sides, and
on all sides, absolutely. I mean, when I spoke with the girl, she was in a situation, and of course, I'm no mental health expert, but she was in a situation where she was feeling really guilty for the fact that her boyfriend was in jail. And I was like, listen, we'll deal with your abortion first. Because I'm sorry, this is the law. You're paying this price and he's paying that price, but this is the law today. And I'm really sorry about that, but we really can't do anything about it. So, when you ask me, what is it that parents and young people should be doing? I think they should be doing two things. One is find out what the law is and be aware. And two, talk about the fact that is this law really fair or not?
Right.
What should be there so that consensual sexual activity between two young people is recognized. But with that, we don't end up throwing out cases which are non-consensual, which are sexually abusing. And we ensure that all of that does get reported, and that
also not wasting your time on a case like this. Yeah, so this is a good point to sort of zoom out a little bit and go back to that Moraes question, because I mean, this is exactly the point. I mean, if I was a young guy today, I'd be like, my God, it would pop me. First of all, I can't access a girl because everything is so segregated. It's becoming, it's quite crazy. I mean, it shouldn't be in today's day and age, but it's still quite segregated, right? And then you can't. I mean, there's such high levels of youngsters with sexual frustration because they just absolutely are never. I mean, if talk, I mean, there's two India. We'll go back again. There's two Indias, right? There's the India and then there's Bharat. And there's India where everything is a bit more permissive and liberal. And then there's the Bharat where everything is very, very segregated. It is still steeped very much in the old cultural tradition of India, where, you literally don't even, you practically just touch your wife the first day that you married her, right? So a guy is going to go out of this thinking, yeah, come on, they're going to chuck me in jail for fooling around with someone, or like, what freedoms do I have as a man? I mean, you're taking everything away, right? So not that I'm fighting on the side of anyone at this point. I'm just saying that, as more and more people learn that it's okay, I mean, to be a little bit more liberal around these things, where does it hit us? Does it hit us like on a society level? What needs to change at a value level for these things to come around full circle, where, everyone's saying, oh, you were doing this, you go to jail, I mean, that's kind of silly, because I mean, I'm sorry, I'm sounding really vague and non-lawyery in the way that I'm approaching this question, but it's almost like saying, you've tied up everything in a way that, the poor chap can't do anything. So, I mean, if you look at it, what do you tell a young man basically growing up in India today? How do you,
and that's the thing that on the one hand, the government itself has had programs of talking about adolescent sexuality and ensuring that they have the right kind of information about contraception, about sex ed and all of that. And then suddenly we decided that we will not talk about sex education at all.
Right.
So now it's, you can't, it's almost like saying that if you talk about it, that means you're promoting promiscuous behavior.
Exactly.
But the whole point is that you are talking about it so that they are not getting information from the wrong places. Exactly. And they are not getting incomplete information. And you're making it okay. You're trying to remove the taboo from sex and sexual activity and all of that. And then now you have this law, which is also saying that if you as so much as touch or even think of touching, in the sense, so, because it says that you are supposed to report mandatorily if you have an apprehension that an offense under this law is going to be committed. Yeah, so if I know, as someone who is a service provider, I know that there is a 17-year-old girl who is buying oral contraceptive pills. So why is she buying those? Obviously, she's buying that because she's sexually active. It's not, it's not something that you're just going to pop just like that.
Yeah, or she has PCOS or something else. I mean, it could be another reason, but
it's good to yeah. So the thing is that it's becoming very confusing. And right. I think we really need to separate the two things, the intention of that law to ensure that you can actually report child sexual abuse, because a lot of times child sexual abuse is not reported. It's it's within the family. A lot of times people don't want to go to the police. It's a lot of times it's the father, and the mother also doesn't want to report because there are no other options. That's the only person who's earning, etc. So to be able to, sort of remedy that, we have ended up bringing in even any consensual activity within the realm of law. which is something that we really need to break down.
As long as a person is a minor. So here's my other question. Then we spoke more about this Moraes business again, and I do want to speak back again to this business of what is, we talked about some of the more progressive versus non-progressive laws. So in some senses, this POCSO is progressive, but it has holes in it, right? Like any law. So I'm assuming that since 2012, it's been, once it's you're litigating under this for a few years, you kind of know what the holes are, and it gets a little bit sharper over time. And I guess that's how laws and things evolve as well. But sitting now as someone you've obviously joined like this area because you've had some passion for it from the beginning. If you could like wave a wand and say there are 2 or 3 things that I really, really want to change in this country, or the laws around what would those be? Because they are really regressive. So Sati is gone. Female feticide, for example, used to be something that would really make my blood boil, right? But okay, so now there is a law that says you cannot declare the sex of the child during an ultrasound. Is it making a difference? I think look at the sex ratios in Haryana. I mean, okay, so this is one issue that's been talked about. People know about it, etc. But which are the ones that you feel there's something that is so regressive that you absolutely have to change? Or do you think we're already in a pretty good place in terms of what
we're not in a pretty good place for sure, but we're not as bad as well. A lot of things have moved. A lot of things have remained the same. I would say that. And I think, I also think that we really need to understand what is the job of the law, really. See, a law can only do this much. So, for example, taking your example of the PCPNDT Act, the one which prohibits the misuse of, ultrasound technology, where you cannot reveal the sex of the fetus, right? But that's all the law can do. If your belief is that having a girl child is a problem, is a burden, you will find ways to ensure that you don't have one.
Right.
So the law can only do this much. There has to be a lot of other, activity with the law over time. Which is something, again, I would say that on the issue of the declining child sex ratio, that has happened, and child sex ratio has improved. I mean, if we look at the recent National Family Health Survey data that was released, the NFHS data, show marked improvement in the last 10 years in the child sex ratio, and that is probably because there is a law, but with the law you have done so much more. Which, I mean, you've also scared people shitless, so there's also that. But there is so much more that has happened.
Yeah.
So I would
then you're talking about what happens with law enforcement officers, what happens with civil society, and all of that to try and make sure that the reasoning behind the laws is made public, that you get more and more people on board with that value system, and over time, and that because sometimes the law changes ahead of you, right, before you change your mind about something.
Yes.
And that is a job of a progressive country, which is to push you, right, to make you come further and further in what you believe, and vice versa. And if there's something that everybody ought to believe, then the law has to take that and put it into practice, right? I would imagine that's the whole
absolutely
cycle.
See, so for example, the change in the criminal law happened after the Delhi rape and after the kind of uproar that had happened. So the change in criminal law, the general criminal law, general definition of rape, etc., was expanded after all of that happened, after the Delhi gang rape case happened in 2012, 2013. And there was a lot of, like I said, uproar about it. There were, there was a commission which was set up, a committee was set up to actually relook at these laws and make suggestions, and that's how then the general criminal law also really changed. So that's the example of where the public demanded a change in law. And something like, something like the PCP and DT Act is where the law is saying, listen, we're going to make things difficult for you till you change your mindset. But your mindset is not going to change just with law, or just with a, for example, the whole, and it's always a very touchy issue, reservation, for example.
Yeah.
Caste-based reservation. Just by having reservation is not enough. You have to constantly talk about the fact that there has been caste-based abuse. It continues. There is still a lot of untouchability practiced even in modern day.
Yeah, absolutely.
But without talking about that, without really explaining why something like a reservation was thought of, if you just keep putting reservation, it only creates bad blood.
Right.
So that for me is an example of, while the law has decided that I'm going to push you to change in a different way, to think in a different way, but nothing else has happened with that.
Right.
You've not done enough to change the way people think.
Right. So there has to be more public sort of support and outreach and that sort of thing to make sure that everything works in tandem. Listen, I'd like to sort of talk about something which, I mean, just to get your opinion on it, which is this whole business of public vigilantism. Now, which is basically taking the law into your own hands in a way. I mean, to someone who may be on the more liberal end of things, this is terrible because this is, it's the law of the jungle. It's whoever happens to have more might and power at that time. It's what they say goes, and it's therefore not something that should happen at all. And then you have another point of view, and I'm not subscribing to either. I'm just trying to place an argument here, which is that. Which is to say that, listen, if this is my society, my house, my street, my neighborhood, and if I don't take things into my own hands, then how am I going to keep it safe for my family? And this is the idea that leads to this behavior, I would imagine. And then, of course, there's a clash, because then you're going around beating up poor innocent bystanders, perhaps, or somebody you have to drop into a garba, or this is like a dance event in the neighborhood, etc., etc. Now, as a citizen, I mean, depending on who you hang out with, both sides of this argument tend to have a bit of credence, and it's one side could be one that understands the law, that understands rights, etc., etc. And the other side is, well, hey, listen, I've got to protect what I have. After all, if you take it away from me, I'll have nothing, right? So the motivation really comes from that, and you can't blame someone for trying to do that. So how do you start explaining to these two sides of the argument that, hey, this is what you should do if you come across somebody breaking the law? What's the point of view? I mean, like, because would you advise everybody to just say, I'll take you to the police? Actually, the police also has to have cases where there's been an actual violation, right?
See, I think there are 2-3 things that you're saying here. One is really people taking to the streets, whether it's and irrespective of what the issue is, and people taking to the streets and then that becoming violent. So there's that.
Yeah.
People have been taking to the streets. I mean, our whole independence movement was that there were people on the streets who were protesting. There were peaceful means, there were violent means. Everyone has their own points of view about that. But that has always been there. I think the basic problem really is that we are losing confidence in the system, and that's why this this urgency or this need to take things in your own hands.
Right.
So, and again, I'm not really talking about who the government is or what's the ideology or anything. I think it's just the fact that we as a country, as citizens, we are slowly and surely losing confidence in the way the system works. Whether it was for whatever reason, And I think that's the reason, and I think that is what really we really need to keep working on. We do, and I bring this back to the constitution. That is the non-negotiable. And as long as we know about it and we respect it and we talk about it and we insist on it,
Right.
Otherwise we will keep seeing more and more instances of lawlessness, more and
Right.
more instances of people just deciding to serve justice on their own because
On
the
their own.
law
Yeah.
because the law takes so long. So
Yeah.
it is really also on the state to really reinvent itself in a sense. How is it going to
Also,
ensure that?
yeah. But also, maybe a sense of values, because you can't say my values are better than yours, but there is I mean, the whole point about the constitution is that there is a certain standard around what values should fly no matter what the situation, and that's the whole point. And then this has been debated and put in there. So if the constitution is saying something, it's because mm, you know it's because it absolutely should be the non-negotiable. And there's people who've thought about this long and hard enough. And so for people to know that. So yeah, I mean, I'm finding this talk really interesting for this reason, that if you're just a human being who's trying to just eke out a living, right? And if you are just trying to send your kids to school or just put food on the table, etc., and you happen to be walking by, most likely you will also find yourself on the wrong side of the law, simply either because you don't know it or because somebody has taken offense to what you're eating or how you look or where you wish to pray or whatever it is. Now, without getting this conversation into going down that road, because when the Goa school, for instance, is neutral, we say we don't take sides on this, but we do obviously have personal opinions. Um, the reason I'm saying this is because if you are just trying to eke out a living and put things together for yourself in your future, then there are still certain things that you ought to know as to where you can get your protections from. So, what would you say to that? I mean, like, is it easier now, for instance, for a woman to go to the police station and say, "Look, I'm being harassed," without being troubled and locked up herself? Is it easier now for a case to be registered, for people to get legal help, for example, if you can't pay for it? Are those systems, those basic, where you reach the common man, are those basic arms of the law in better nick now than they used to be?
No, absolutely. I would say that as far as access to legal aid is concerned, as far as accessing a police station is concerned, it's definitely better than where it was. It's not the best yet. Uh, um, and again, I'll come back to what you said earlier, that there's the India and then there's the Bharat. And so it will also differ from place to place. I mean, it would probably be much, much better in a metro city or in a city in comparison with a town or a village, for example,
Yeah.
where the dynamics really change with the police, with the courts, and all of that. But the system is definitely there, and again, this is also something that I say about our laws. We have a lot of laws, and most of them are very, very good. Where we really, really fall is in the implementation.
Right.
And I come back to the Domestic Violence Act, for example. The Domestic Violence Act, the key person in that Domestic Violence Act is the protection officer. It's the protection officer who will be the link between the woman who's facing the violence and anything else that the woman needs. So if she needs orders from the court, if she needs medical treatment, if she needs to stay in a shelter home, if she needs police assistance, it's the protection officer who's the key.
That's
But
fantastic.
protection officers are not appointed.
That's absolutely fantastic.
Or protection officers are not appointed, or they are appointed and they don't have any system, or they are people who have additional responsibility.
Correct.
So the law is brilliant.
We put much more trust in the law, right? Because now the system has become has changed in a way that it protects and makes it easier for a person who has suffered through all of this to to find justice.
Right, but the point I'm making is that the law, in spirit, is perfect. On paper is perfect. But where's the
Yes.
implementation? Where's the financial resource for it? Where is your political will to ensure that something of this nature is in place and is functioning and has everything that it requires? So, again, the point that I'm making here is that the law will have its own role, but that's not enough. By having a law, having a new law, having a stricter law, it's not going to solve any issues, because just law cannot do on its own. It has to be in tandem, in combination with conversations, with with change in mindset, with creating awareness, with creating with encouraging people to talk about it. But just by having a law, it's not really going to make any difference.
It's not enough. Absolutely. All right. Well, I mean, this has been the most enlightening conversation. And it's, as I said, it's a recording this time. But I do see Rashid, Souza, I'm not sure who that is, but Rashid and Paloma, I know you're on this call. If you have any burning questions, we've got about 5 minutes to go. Please do put them to Anubha now. Otherwise, we can let her go, because I keep telling her time is money. Okay. Well,
yeah, good, thanks.
Yes, Paloma.
No, I was just saying it's been very enlightening. So especially the law about what we break the most, it was very interesting. I didn't know that as well. So very interesting. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anubha. It's been really, really good to have you here and to really cover such a vast number of topics. You couldn't go really into details about too many things, but our effort at the Goa School is to give people a map, sort of like a mental map for how things work, without necessarily going into the detail. I mean, that's stuff they can find out on their own, right? So, I mean, this talk has been really wonderful in that respect, because one has really understood, okay, this is, how I get in touch with the law. This is the sort of things I shouldn't do. I should do what's working well, how the constitution works. And then, if that's not working properly, there's other countries on top who check you to see, whether or not we're doing well on our human rights record. So really, it was quite interesting, the breadth of discussion. So thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
And
My pleasure.
I hope we'll connect with you. Yeah. Rashid? Yeah, okay. I hope we'll be able to.
Thank you for this. I joined a little late, so I missed a lot of the program, but whatever I heard was very helpful, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're recording this, Rashid, so you'll be able to see a recording of this later in your own time. So again, thank you so much. It's been fabulous and great to reconnect. As I said, I mean, it's been a few years. I hope to be able to rope you in more and more to help with the Goa School.
It will be my pleasure. Absolutely.
Yeah, let us know. We'll have a chat later as to how maybe we can do more things together. But thank you so much and all the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.